Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Thank you. Welcome home.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. Did you get
Hello,
much
everybody.
sleep?
Not enough sleep. Going back to take a nap after this.
If you'd like to start and just give us your impressions and some of the things that, the highlights you took away from your trip.
Well, a couple of things that I think are worth mentioning. Number one, our troops are doing extraordinary work. And they do it day in, day out. We were in Afghanistan, we were in Iraq. Many of these young men and women have been on 2, 3, in some cases 4 or 5 tours of duty. But morale remains high. They are proud of the work that they're doing. They are carrying out their duties with excellence and determination. And so that was very encouraging. I think the violence is down in Iraq. And the work of our troops has greatly contributed to consolidating some of those gains. There's no doubt that we've seen Al-Qaeda marginalized in the Sunni regions in Iraq. That has made a big contribution towards quelling the violence. And the Shia militias have stood down. I think that Prime Minister Maliki, his willingness to take more responsibility and set a time frame or a timeline for withdrawing our troops is a very positive step. In Afghanistan, though, things are worsening. And we visited there just a week or so after a raid on a U.S. outpost that had resulted in 9 of our soldiers being killed. And what you get a sense of is that a combination of drug trafficking in Afghanistan, a government that is, an Afghan government that is still not getting enough services out to the people, combined with the ability of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda to engage in raids and then cross over into the Pakistani held territories so that they've got safe havens there that U.S. troops can't follow. That is a huge problem. We're going to need more troops in Afghanistan, but we're also going to need more effective cooperation from the Pakistani government in rooting out these safe havens. So there's some good news on the war front, but there's also some bad news. And one of the most important things for the next president is to work with the commanders on the ground to find the right strategy to go after the Central Front on Terror, go after Al-Qaeda, go after the Taliban, while maintaining some of the gains that have been made in Iraq. The other impression that I had was that the world is waiting for the United States to re-engage. In the Middle East, Israelis and Palestinians want to see us active and involved. And they're pleased that the Bush administration has now participated in getting these Annapolis talks off the ground. I think that Prime Minister Olmert and President Abbas are making some progress on that front. But what we need is sustained American engagement. Without that American engagement, it's very hard to make progress. When I was traveling through Europe, obviously we had a big event in Berlin that was a testimony, I think, to how hungry Europeans are for American leadership. That's not a matter of unilateral action, but a matter of engaging countries and peoples all around the world around our common challenges, but also our common opportunities. When you think about the big problems that we face here at home, they are connected to the problems we face abroad. If we can get more support for actions in Afghanistan, those are fewer troops from the United States that we have to send, or it's less money that we have to invest in those efforts, which frees up money for us to invest in keeping folks in their homes here in the United States, or making sure that we're providing college scholarships for young people and make higher education affordable. There's a direct link between the energy problems that we're experiencing here at home and a lack of a coordinated policy in thinking about energy and climate change abroad. So one of the key insights that I come away with is it is very difficult for us to meet these 21st century challenges unless we've got more effective partnerships with our allies and other countries overseas. And I think they are ready for it. And it offers the next president an enormous opportunity, but we're going to have to take action. Now, the last point I'd make is while I was traveling, obviously I was monitoring carefully the situation back here in the United States. I'm glad that we finally passed a housing bill that the president has decided he will sign after all. And that housing bill, I think, is a good start in trying to create a floor beneath which the housing market will not sink. We've got to prevent people from losing their homes. We've got to start shoring up home values all across the country. It's having a huge impact in terms of people's security and their bottom lines. We're going to have to do more, though. I think that the economy has worsened enough that we need a second round of stimulus. And tomorrow I'm going to actually be calling some of my top economic advisors together, Paul Volcker, Warren Buffett, Bob Rubin, a range of economists and experts on the financial markets to start thinking about how do we take some short-term steps to shore up the economy, but also how do we take those long-term steps structurally to start dealing with big problems like our dependence on foreign oil. So it was a great trip. I missed my kids, missed Michelle. They came to greet me at the airport, which never happens. Usually Michelle's like,
See you at home.
see you at home. You know, usually I have to beg just to make sure that they're not asleep when I get home. But they surprised me at the airport, which was wonderful.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this, because just 3.5 years ago, you were a state senator, represented a district just a couple miles from where we are. Since then, you have met with world leaders, you've traveled the globe, but clearly 8 days overseas doesn't make anybody a foreign policy expert. What more do you need to learn?
Well, you know, I don't think that you ever stop learning. But I think it's pretty clear, Suzanne, if you talk to the people I met with, they feel confident that I know what I'm talking about and what I'm doing. So one of the things that I think is important, though, for whoever the next president is to make certain that we project ourselves on the world stage with a sense of humility, a sense that we are listening to others, because one of the problems with our foreign policy is the sense that we are very clear about our own interests, but not so clear about other people's interests. And that makes us less effective in terms of advancing our security and the issues that are important to us.
Is there an area that is a priority for you?
Well, we've got to get Afghanistan right. If you've got Al-Qaeda, you've got the Taliban in training camps and safe havens just a few miles inside the Pakistan border that can act with impunity, then it is going to be hard for us to stabilize Afghanistan, and those folks are in a position then to plot how to kill Americans. We've got to get the Pakistani government involved in a much more significant way than they are right now. The other thing that we have to do is get the entire world united around the need for both big carrots and big sticks to present to the Iranians so that they stand down on nuclear weapons. We cannot afford a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, as volatile as that place is. We cannot have Iran getting a nuclear weapon, which then triggers a decision by other countries in the Gulf to get nuclear weapons. That would not only affect our ability to operate in that theater, but that offers the prospect of terrorists getting their hands on a nuclear weapon. And there's no more important security agenda for us to address than the possibilities of nuclear proliferation, including into non-state actors.
Senator, I want to ask you about a subject you've had to address repeatedly on this trip, which is the situation in Iraq and the question of whether the surge has helped improve conditions there. During the primaries, you criticized Senator Clinton for failing to say that her vote authorizing the war was a mistake. Now we have commanders on the ground pretty much saying that the surge has succeeded, and yet you've said that if you had to do it all over again, you still would have voted against the surge. We're not going to ask you whether to, to change your position here.
You're not going to ask me, but go ahead.
But I would like to know whether you feel that after the last 5 years, haven't we learned that a commander-in-chief needs to be willing to acknowledge mistakes or errors in judgment when circumstances change?
I mean, I have to say, it is fascinating to me to hear you guys re-emphasize this over and over again. I have not heard yet somebody ask John McCain whether his vote to go into Iraq was a mistake. I haven't, during the entire week that we were having this conversation. And so the question is, what are the strategic judgments that have to be made in order to make America safe? I strongly believe that going into Iraq was a disaster, strategically. It distracted us from finishing the job in Afghanistan. I have acknowledged repeatedly in every one of these interviews that the fact that we put more troops in there helped to quell the violence. Right? I've been saying that all week. The question is whether or not my position in suggesting that we need to begin a phased withdrawal, we should have begun it earlier, whether that position that I took was a mistake. And I do not believe it was, because I continue to believe that the only way for us to stabilize the situation in Iraq, I believed it then and I believe it now, is for the parties to arrive at a set of political accommodations. Now, anytime you put 20 to 30,000 U.S. troops anywhere in the world, they are going to perform brilliantly, and that is going to contribute to keeping the lid on violence. The question is whether or not that military action alone is sufficient to solve the problems. And had there been a continuation of a civil war in Iraq, in which Sunnis and Shias were going at each other full bore, in which Sunnis were still aligned with Al-Qaeda, using military solutions to that problem would not have been sufficient in my estimation. Now, we don't know what would have happened had we followed my plan to begin a phased withdrawal to put pressure on the Maliki government to start negotiating more effectively with some of these other parties. But that is no way takes away from the great work that our troops did and the terrific tactical work that General Petraeus and Ambassador Crocker have engaged in. The key now is how do we move forward? And I think that people believe that at this point we are in a position to start drawing down our troops, partly because we've got to get some troops into Afghanistan and there's no other place for us to get them.
So based on what you saw on your trip, you feel that the timetable that you set out for redeployment still makes sense?
I think it's realistic. I think that obviously General Petraeus wants as much flexibility as possible, and as I said during my trip, if I were in his shoes, I'd want as much flexibility as well. But when you've got the Prime Minister of Iraq, the people of Iraq saying they are ready to take more responsibility, when we're seeing more Iraqi forces take the lead in actions, we need to take advantage of that opportunity, particularly because we've got to deal with Afghanistan, and we can't keep spending $10 billion a month in Iraq at a time when we've got enormous pressing needs here in the United States of America, including, by the way, taking care of veterans who are coming home with post-traumatic stress disorder, disabilities, and they are still not getting a lot of the services that they need.
Senator, I want to use a word that you love to use, audacity. A lot of people looked at the trip and they saw the palaces, the world leaders, the 200,000 that were gathered in Berlin, and they said, the audacity of this trip, it looks like he is running for president of the world. And a lot of people looked and they want to know, what out of this trip did you take away that you feel makes you a stronger candidate to be a leader here?
Well, let me make a couple points. Well, first of all, I basically met with the same folks that John McCain met with after he won the nomination. He met with all these leaders. He also added a trip to Mexico, a trip to Canada, a trip to Colombia. And nobody suggested that that was audacious. I think people assumed that what he was doing was to talk to world leaders who we may have to deal with should we become president. That's part of the job that I'm applying for. And so, I was puzzled by this notion that somehow what we were doing was in any way different from what Senator McCain or a lot of presidential candidates have done in the past. Now, I admit we did it really well, but that shouldn't be a strike against me. You know, if I was bumbling and fumbling through this thing, I would have been criticized for that. So that's point number one. I don't know the political effect of this when I come back. You know, I think people are worried about gas prices. They're worried about job security. They're worried about their retirement funds as the stock market goes down. So probably a week of me focusing on international issues doesn't necessarily translate into higher poll numbers here in the United States because people are understandably concerned about the immediate effects of the economy. And that's what we will be talking about for the duration. I do think that in terms of me governing, being an effective president, that this trip was helpful because I think I've established relationships and a certain bond of trust with key leaders around the world who have taken measure of my positions and how I operate, and I think can come away with some confidence that this is somebody I can deal with.